A little bit of a technical glitch, but we're on and we're live. And so welcome to the New York Space Business Roundtable. We're honored to have you here. During the roundtable, you will be muted. However, the chat function is available for your comments and questions, and we welcome you to make full use. At the 1 p.m. hour, we will remove the mute restriction and give the audience a chance to ask questions of our esteemed panel. If your question is in the chat, you will be invited to ask it. And with that, it is my distinct pleasure to welcome Mr. Louis Saccarilla to greet us. Welcome.
Oh, yes, thank you, Tamara. Thank you for that distinct introduction. And hello, everyone. This is the third Wednesday of the month, so it must be the New York Space Business Roundtable. Got a great program for you today. This is a topic that just about everybody in the industry is talking about. And we've got people who hit it head on, no pun intended. Before we do that, though, and I introduce our guests, let me give a shout out to our sponsors and our sponsoring organizations. Okay, we'd like to thank the people who pay our bills here. And they include the Luxembourg's Trade and Investment Office here in New York, Dhruva Space in India. We appreciate their ongoing support. And also a new sponsor for the roundtable, Astroscale, who we welcome as a supporter, financial supporter and an underwriter of the roundtable, as well as World Teleport Association, the only trade association in the world for the operating teleports. Our supporting organizations today, as always, a Space News magazine, and a new one, Empire Space, who is based, of course, here in New York, the Empire State, and we appreciate them coming back as a supporting organization. What we're going to do now is what we always do, and that is to show you a video that relates to the topic today. And I think the one today is one you're going to like. So I'm not even going to set it up. I'm just going to have you watch it and maybe react to it. So Tamara, why don't we blow some stuff up?
That's not. Okay, it's going to be one of those days today.
This is really to hypnotize you, to make sure you enjoy the event.
Just going to keep it going.
There we go. The risks of space and reducing them is part of our new campaign, and we'll be talking about that today. What you just saw, of course, was one of the problems that we're trying to solve today. And so just to give you an example, that was sort of the real thing happening out there in space. What What we usually do at this segment, and by the way, we usually show a better satellite world video from the SSPI campaign, where we show how our industry is making the world a better place. That was kind of like one, but we'll tell you how, and the people that we talk to later are going to be the people who actually make space safer. So that was why we showed you that. At this time, we usually bring on a reporter from Space News, Deborah Werner from Silicon Valley, who is the reporter out there. She's on holiday this week. So with that, we're actually going to move right into the panel. Tamara, is that right? I believe that is right. So you can see today's panelists, and they're coming to us from all different parts of the world, from, I believe, Denver, for sure from Japan, and I believe from Hawaii. So we are globally represented today, and I appreciate people making the time in their own time zones to be with us today. Let me start with the gentleman at the bottom, a very, very distinguished person in our industry and in the world of commerce. He's Alex Fielding. Alex, who many of you know, started his career at Cisco and Apple, where he worked on several generations of the Mac operating system, PowerBook. He was part of the first iMac team. And after a stint at Exodus Communications under former Apple CTO Ellen Hancock, he co-founded GPS company Wheels of Zeus with Apple co-founder Steve Wozniak. That collaboration with Mr. Wozniak led him to the CEO title at the company where he is today, Privateer. And he'll be talking about Privateer, its mission, its vision, and some of the things that I think will surprise you and please you when you hear it. By the way, Alex is a founding member of Singularity University at the NASA Ames Research Center. And he lives in Maui with his family, and I believe he's German Shepherd. Alex, welcome.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here, and I'm really delighted by the topic. This is one of those areas that we have to get right. We don't have a choice to get this one wrong. So very, very delighted to be a part of the panel. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's great to see you. And I got it right. You're in Maui today?
That's right. We're headquartered in Maui, so about half of our company is out in Kihei in South Maui. About 2 miles from, for those of you that are familiar with the Amos conference, we're about 2 miles from where they host Amos every year.
Right. And the one question you never get is, how's the weather?
It's always perfect. I mean, it's 6 a.m. here right now. I'm getting to watch a glimpse of sunlight out the window here of coming up over Haleakala. So it's fantastic.
Sounds like a good deal. But there's a lot of hard work that you guys are doing out there. Again, thanks for making the time to be with us. Also, you'll meet Dr. Chiara Manfletti. She's the director and COO of Neuraspace and professor of space propulsion and mobility at the Technical University in Munich. Prior to that, she headed the policy coordination department at the European Space Agency at ESA. She worked at the German Aerospace Center as a research engineer, and after a stint at ESA as advisor to the Director General, she became the first president of the Portuguese National Space Agency in 2019. She is referred to as the mother of space safety, which is not a bad title to have a couple of days after Mother's Day here in the United States or anytime. And she's also a beekeeper as one of her hobbies. And I got a lot of questions there for her, but Chiara's coming to us from Japan. So Dr. Manfletti, welcome.
Hello, good morning. I'm confused in which time zone we're all in, so I'll just say good morning. It's 1 o'clock here in Japan, where I am heading off to this conference, and I'm very happy to be with you all today. Thanks for having me.
Well, we're delighted you made the time, and we look forward to hearing more about Neuraspace. And finally, in our lineup today is Jack Deasy. Jack is the Vice President of Business Development and Advanced Systems at Astroscale here where we are in the United States. Jack joined Astroscale in 2022 after serving for 25 years in commercial business development and government relations, notably as Vice President of Government Product Management at SES, where he led strategy and development of SES network services and solutions for governments and humanitarian response organizations. For a decade, he also led Inmarsat's business development activities for public safety and disaster response, as well as aeronautic and UAV programs. And we're really pleased that Astroscale is here, and Jack Deasy. Jack, welcome.
Thanks, Lou. It's great to be here. Fantastic subject. Obviously, Astroscale is all about space sustainability. So really happy to be with such a distinguished panel this morning.
Well, we're looking forward to hearing from you. And finally, you'll hear from him later, my colleague and partner in crime here at the New York Space Business Roundtable, Mr. Joe Fargnoli, who will wrap us up with the New York Minute. Hey, Joe, welcome.
Hey, thanks, Lou. Looking forward to a great session today.
I think it's going to be. Well, let me just jump right into this. Let's first talk about the investment conditions being made in commercial space for our investment community. What does the overall landscape look like in terms of opportunities? And Jack, I'll start with you. Given your experience, how does it look from the perspective of your past lives at satellite operators, SES, and Inmarsat especially?
Well, I mean, I think opportunities is exactly the right word. You know, when you look at what NSR is predicting in terms of overall on-orbit servicing market growth over the next 10 years through 2032, let's say, of $14 billion plus, that is fueling a lot of really interesting investment into the space and creating new opportunities for flexibility for the existing commercial operators and lots of new space for entirely new services for new entrants.
Yeah, again, as you look at it from the perspective of the geos, that sort of traditional space, what's the most significant shift in the landscape, would you say, when it comes to what you're seeing out there in the commercial sector?
Well, I think Astroscale is focused on that part of the market, particularly for life extension services, and giving those operators who are very sophisticated, decades of experience operating on orbit. They understand their market, they understand their business case and return on investment, and life extension, which is probably one of the first on-orbit services, sort of a new piece of the infrastructure of the orbital arc, gives them new ways of managing their fleet, potentially moving satellites more advantageously when they need to, extend their life, and therefore changing some of the initial long-term return on investment calculations. It fundamentally comes down to more flexibility for a really well-informed, sophisticated audience.
Yep, I think it's well said. Alex, I'm going to throw it over to you. I mean, you're not a stranger to sort of brand new opportunities in commercial space, given your history. Again, similar question. What does this landscape look like in terms of opportunities, but also picking up on what Jack said, the investment outlook, which is much longer term probably this time than even you guys are typically used to, right?
Yeah, I mean, I would echo what Jack said. It's critical now that we invest, or we will be behind. And I mean, I'm talking about the global the institutional investment thesis on space has changed radically in the last 24 months. Mm-hmm. And we've seen the market kind of, rail and respond to that a little bit. And the US market in particular, right? It's very, very tough. We've seen the bankruptcy of Virgin Orbit. We've seen Astra's delisting notice. We've seen, obviously the response and reaction to the market when things don't go perfectly well in space. I mean, we do call these things test flights for a reason. And the market may be overreacting a little bit. Yeah. And we've also seen cyclic trends in institutional investment, right? So we've seen hard tech, space tech, frontier tech partners at very large firms cycle from what for a moment was a very, very, very hot space investment thesis, which I think they were actually right at the right time, to a reaction response to things that didn't connect right away. So we saw investors move to, move from space to crypto and crypto to AI. And I'm a believer that that will cycle back the other direction because it has to. The minute that Starship gets payload costs to where they will be, and as Jack said, you look at those launch plans and you look at what's coming, it's not a wish and a hope and a prayer. It's now just a matter of timing. And that timing is coming so fast that if the investment community doesn't catch up with that thesis, we will be behind or further behind. And so I think it's not a question of not having a market that has access to capital, but I think that capital, no matter what industry you're in right now, is more expensive and more onerous, and certainly a tougher market than what we saw, a year or 2 years ago.
Right.
But that being said, it's so needed. It's just a matter of one more cycle and one more turn of the machine to get everybody back aligned to where we should be.
Yeah, and I think that's a great way to look at it, because it is a wheel, right? Are there, I meant to ask you this when we did our podcast, but are there similarities to what you see in today's landscape with regard to the space debris and space infrastructure, which is really what we've been talking about, and some of the things you saw in the early days at Apple or Exodus? Any similarities at all?
I think the similarity is that infrastructure is hard.
Yes.
And, rockets and payload, if it was easy, everyone would do it. So I think that solving for problem one opens the door to the floodgate of really a mass understanding of the cascading problems that exist. I mean, they don't not exist now, but there'll be more attention on them the minute that things begin to scale at a bigger rate. A problem that investors have, since we're kind of on the topic of investor climate, is that we talk about the commercial space economy, and no matter what part of that industry we're in, we all want to build an enduring space economy. We want something that propels humanity forward. And today, it's half true and it's half fib, right? The bulk of the market is actually still getting spent in government. And we're not seeing yet the tail from Global 2000 business to commercial companies to everyday consumers and entrepreneurs having the access to space that you need to do great things. That is coming like a freight train or like a rocket ship. Maybe that's a better analogy, or but that's coming very, very fast. And the investors that have gone off of cycle or off of trend because of the current market condition will be thrown right back in. And it's, and it's not a question of one investment type or another. These things are all related. So I think we're going to see that cycle now turning back towards space, and it may be space with other technologies that are in the focus area of those investors that have developed some space expertise. So it's not a bad thing, but it is a tough market. I mean, you look at a company, and look, full disclosure, I'm still on Astra's advisory board. Astra's a great company with great technology, and there've been missteps. Did the company deserve the punishment that they've had in the stock market, or did Virgin Orbit or did other really good companies that are building deserve that? Deserves kind of a rough word. But I think there's an overreaction, and there's an overreaction in our market versus other world markets, and that will change and that will get better.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because as you say, there's an inevitability in terms of what we do, and there will be, the market there, right? We're sailing, the ocean's there, the other side of the ocean is there, and whether our species likes it or not, that's our destiny. The way that shapes out commercially is really the big question. It's sort of the fun question, but not if you've got a lot of your skin in the game, I suppose. But you always seem to have fun. Chiara, space safety is here to stay, and you should know, you're the mother of it, of course. But it's a real thing. And as Alex said, if this was easy, if launch was easy or rocketry was easy, everybody would do it. Not everybody's doing it. Neuraspace is doing it though. You have the heritage and the background to sort of carry off a commercial venture. First of all, tell us a little bit about Neuraspace. I'm not sure we all know about the business. And then again, we'll ask you the question about the current landscape and opportunities that you perceive given your experience.
Yeah, thanks, Lou. Yeah, sure. So Neuraspace is a startup. It's 2.5 years old, and we have presented to the market a solution for space traffic management. So our basic aim is to keep space safe and make sure that operational efforts because of collisions doesn't go through the roof with operators having to spend 24/7 looking with thousands of people looking at this problem and having to deal with it in the classical way it's done today. So it's basically human powered. So we're bringing AI, machine learning, and data fusion to space traffic management. That's where we start as a company. As I said, the company's 2.5 years old. We've raised some funds, admittedly in Europe. The investment landscape, I always have to smile because when I hear US companies saying it's tough, I'm always thinking, in Europe it's harder, which is unfortunate but true. Still, I mean, we work in a global world, so it's good. I mean, there's VCs looking to invest in European companies as well, so that's good. Just jumping on what you were saying and asking regarding investments, I was just reflecting on Satellite 23. I was there, and I was actually listening to a panel. I can't remember who was talking from. It was a U.S. Government official, and he was saying, Morgan Stanley believes that the world economy is going to be a $1 trillion US economy, but there was a statement made just recently, and China believes it's going to be a $10 trillion US economy. So why do we just say it's $1 trillion US economy? And why am I bringing this up? I think I agree that there's so much opportunity out there. And one thing I find fascinating is Neuraspace, as I said, is 2.5 years old. Yes, we do have a product on the market. We are contacted by many classically non-space VCs more and more because they're finding space interesting and because they believe that space safety is something which has to be done because otherwise the rest is not going to happen. So somehow even non-space VCs have recognized the importance of what we're doing, and they see it as an opportunity despite the fact that there's very little regulation in place, et cetera, et cetera. So for me, that just screams for opportunity.
Yeah. I want to get back to you in a second, but Alex, you were nodding your head and actually smiling a little bit when when Chiara was referring to the 1 trillion, Chinese say 10 trillion. What were you smiling about?
Oh, I've got a funny sense of humor and I've had too much caffeine, so I was thinking they're just calculating in inflation. So that's what you get for asking. But it is
asking you, yeah.
Yeah, it's a tougher climate internationally for sure, and yet we do see our friends at iSpace with their public offering recently, and also with the minor mishap when you have a moonshot. Sometimes things don't always go perfectly well, but you look at the response from an economic standpoint. You look at the response on the Japan exchange, the Tokyo exchange, compared to what that would have been on NASDAQ or New York or other markets. I would suspect if iSpace was a US listed company and that had happened, they would be a bankrupt US company right now, because the market's very unforgiving at this moment in the US stock exchange for space companies. So it is that's also becoming cyclic, right? We're starting to see a more measured response in global markets, where in the US exchange, we're seeing a less forgiving market. Even companies that projected certain earnings and had a certain forecast before the market turned the way that it has now, many of them have gotten very close or even on target for what their estimates were in the space industry. They're not necessarily being rewarded for being on target, and in some cases they're being punished for not being well over target. And that is an overreaction to the market. So I agree with everything said. I think it's just this is a part of the climate that we'll have to correct, and it's also being made complicated, quite frankly, because governments are stepping in and saying that they are going to produce solutions, and yet not necessarily talking about standards.
Right.
So,
Yeah, I want to get to that later in the conversation. That's exactly right. But what does that do to a company like your three here? That's a great point. Before I move to Jack, I want to pick up on what both of you said to Jack, but somebody just posted in chats, Chiara, that Neuraspace was started with 50 euro on 50 euros. Is that correct?
Yeah, so
Did I
Neuraspace was started with very little. The history is actually, it's a very funny one. So Nuno Sebastian, who was founder of Feedside, unicorn based in Portugal, that does AI machine learning for fraud detection for banking system. Actually, he walked into my office one day when I was head of the Portuguese Space Agency, and we were just having a talk about debris and the importance of it and whether it was going to become a market. And I said to him, it will. And we had a huge debate out of how much there was going to be a commercial push and whether it was going to be mostly a commercial push or institutional push. And out of this conversation back in 2019, then the company was founded. Yes, and that is true. Absolutely.
Wow. Well, that's going to turn out to be a great investment. Jack, I want to pick up on sort of the thread here. I think Alex is, as usual, right on alluding to something. But I guess the question for you is, given Astroscale's business model, which I'm quite familiar with, the level of patience required here, what you're going to do, which is really de-risk space, sort of plow the highway for everybody. Do we need to look at ROI and investments differently for our industry than we have historically here in our markets?
That's an interesting question. I suspect the short answer is yes, and the longer answer is no, right? I mean, at the end of the day, investments are going to evaluate space opportunities in comparison to other opportunities that they have.
Yeah.
When you look at Astroscale, which we just celebrated our 10th anniversary. So we're not in this for the short term, right? We've raised money, we're building a company, we've got offices and entities now in Europe and in the United States and in Japan. That's essential to building out the kind of global business you need to access the global market. But investors that are going to be satisfied in that stage of the development have to be looking with that kind of time frame. By the same token, they're naturally going to anticipate business cases that actually get to the point where there's a real ROI that can be calculated. I think for Astroscale's business, we view sort of three things we have to do at the same time. Our fundamental business is about building the infrastructure that is needed for the on-orbit economy to take off, right? Space debris mitigation and other basic capabilities in terms of maneuverability and in-space situational awareness that are the baseline infrastructure on the technology side. At the same time, we have two other things that we focus on. One of them is the policy and regulatory infrastructure that's needed. And it really is kind of a similar to the hardware and technology infrastructure. What are the rules of the road? What are the shared understandings? What are the intergovernmental and industry standards that are needed that taken together give investors confidence and security that the policy ecosystem is in place? And then the third thing that we work on a lot is, and then what are the business cases? What are the business cases for debris removal as opposed to life extension? What are the business cases for end-of-life services? They're all connected, but putting the three of those infrastructures in place, I think, is how Astroscale sees moving the market to the point where investors can be confident to invest in us, but more broadly in on-orbit services going forward.
Yeah, very good. So again, you have to look at it that way, and that assumes a certain amount of time is going to elapse before this market matures enough for return. At least that's what I hear on it. And let's talk about the business models and how each of you arrived at yours. Alex, let me start with you, getting into the mind of an entrepreneur. You told me in our podcast that we did last July that those 27,000 space objects that are estimated are low by a couple of million. And so I'm assuming that as you began to put together the business plan and model, that was sort of top of mind. Am I right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's always two sides to any market, right? There's greed and there's fear. And I've heard it say that in space, greed and fear can be translated to war and commerce. And that's really unfortunate, but it tends to be somewhat true.
Yeah.
So we're now the byproduct in the commercial community of companies that have to add value, and we pray to add value on greed because no one wants to sell fear. And there's an unusual market condition there also, which is that if you want to build an enduring space economy, you have to build it on increased revenue and increased opportunity. And that means safety and accessibility are intrinsically linked, right? You can't have accessibility if you have no safety, and you can't scale it. So the question almost becomes whether or not we group of companies, because we're not competitors. I mean, no one on this panel is competing with each other. We're all enablers of each other. We're all pushing for the same future. How do we get there? And also make that within the return horizon of our, I'm assuming that, you know, we all have really smart investors that are writing checks that have a similar return profile, and they're all going to want to see returns during a fund year, not necessarily during a lifetime. So we have to, you know, kind of balance the gas pedal and the brake to try to manage a business during these economic conditions. And we're seeing a lot of consolidation. So we're seeing a lot of companies that made incredible progress and ran out of runway. I mean, or we're seeing a lot of companies that created very, very good technology, but the timing was just wrong for the next raise. So there's a couple of categories in this and across these sectors that are connected, where we're seeing commercial companies focused on commerce, investing in, buying, doing even more corporate venture capital than usual in the space industry to help, you know, on-orbit servicing and all of the other things that have to happen to make the space economy better. Are there many millions of things that we can't sense or detect, nevertheless, you know, monitor or track or predict? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, this is the equivalent technology we're using for the most part today to track these objects. It would be the equivalent to having air traffic control tell a 747, there's a pigeon on your left wing.
Yeah.
I mean, but that's, and by the way, it's doing 17,000 miles an hour, or, you know, it's doing better than 7.5 kilometers a second on average. That's hard. And you know, and it's good that it's hard, because from an investor standpoint, I think barriers to entry, we're in a set of markets that are interconnected, that the companies chasing or upstarting, they will have hard times getting into the market, and they'll have solutions that will be even more highly scrutinized. So it's not a bad thing for any of us. It just means that you're seeing more cooperation than competition. You're seeing more cooperation. And, you know, it's a strange one, because while we all meet with investors, and as we all continue to think about, you know, going beyond execution and into higher scale, the investors ask questions oftentimes that assume that there will be one category winner. And if it's a truly enduring space economy, you'll have a dozen companies in every sector or more that you would just classify as winners. But we're not there yet from the investor psychology. The investors are still thinking very early. They're not necessarily seeing the growth that we're seeing in the industry. And it will catch up, right? We're going to see that shift. The minute Starship gets a payload up,
Yeah.
successful, and at those economics, you're going to find an entire investor community go back into chase mode and try to figure out what to do with all of these things that are going onto orbit that are not just communication satellites and Starlinks and OneWebs and Kuipers and others.
Yeah.
And that's going to change, I'm sure everyone on the Zoom's life will get infinitely better from an investor climate standpoint. And then it will get infinitely harder because now we're all going to be firmly in the scale risk category of how do you grow businesses where the challenges are now regulatory, nation state, it's nation state to nation state, it's international law. It's all of the things that we want to see happen to build a cooperative space ecosystem. And, look, I know I shouldn't say it, but I'll say it anyway. I think so that we can build a commercial space economy that is designed for commercial businesses and, for consumers and for everyday folks, and not designed as a new frontier for warfighting, which unfortunately, a lot of the investment right now is tied to that thought process of we're going to, certain governments will build, the equivalent of military bases in space. That's
Yeah.
not what we've all hoped and desired for. That's not where our hearts are.
No, it never was.
It may be I wouldn't even say it's a necessary evil, but it may be a temporary evil. I hope it's a temporary evil.
Well, it assumes some sort of cultural, psychological, emotional, collective shift that's going to happen from the inside out, probably. But I think that's a good description. But Chiara, again, listening to this, I'm thinking that, where you come from with regard to working with ESA, coming out of the civil space sector there, there is more of a commonweal sense, more of a collective mentality in terms of looking at investments that are made. There are national and civil missions. How do you see that sort of playing out as Neuraspace and others move into their missions in Europe and other places?
Well, I think there's a lot that needs to be said or can be said about the role of institutional players in, emerging markets. And certainly, again, when I was back at ESA and at Portugal Space, one of the things that I was trying to introduce a lot was, a shift where the public sector could become, let's say, a customer for the likes of, Neuraspace, privateer, Astroscale, right? For the different elements, like Alex was saying, where we each respond to certain needs that both commercial side as well as the institutional players have. And I think that this shift is still very needed to help also sort of raise the confidence of private investments that there is a market coming. So listening to what both Jack and Alex were saying and what you were asking, Lou, certainly, one of the difficulties that companies have today is that indeed we're not just growing our own companies, but then we're shaping a market which is still very immature, where we need to figure out exactly what is the business model, or what is the exact product market fit, who's ready to pay what for which service. We know that it's coming, but finding tuning to grow that scale and grow that market is the hard part of it, right? And having the institutional side show that it has confidence that this market is coming. It's not a question of if it's coming, it's just a question of when, and trying to change their role so that they accelerate this growth and state for a fact it is coming. I think that's really important. So just before we started the call, I was mentioning that I've been following Astroscale for many years. One of the things that indeed had tried to put in place at ESA was a program where ESA was a customer for debris removal services, right? So there was a call to industry saying, we have X number of objects in space. Please tell me which of these objects you're willing to take down, and please give me a price tag, and that's all, right? Show me that you're confident that you can then take this one experience and go off and turn it into a business model and get commercial traction out of this, because then you will have raised confidence that you can do it, and you will have experimented on at the cost of the institutional players. And I think that's fundamental. And we've seen this, in the US probably faster than we've seen it in Europe with, commercial access to space. And, SpaceX was born out of it, and many others are being born out of it. So again, I think that there's absolutely a lot that can be done from the institutional side. And we are, I think that there's a need to move even faster than we're seeing it. And certainly for space safety and everything that we're discussing about today.
Yeah, it's interesting because as you are all speaking, you're saying it's going to happen. It's here are the conditions that would expand this thing, but you don't know if my fear for you guys is you don't know if the early movers are going to be what the market really needs or what it looks like going forward. But I'm sure you.
But we will for sure.
You will. Yeah, I love the confidence. Well, Jack, I think it's probably time to move to the guardrails or the guide rails, because we've been sort of suggesting it. We've been pushing at it through the whole conversation, right? And it's interesting to me when I listen, for example, to people with AI companies, and you listen to people who are in certain sectors in the technology space, they're almost begging for regulations in certain areas, right? They want standards so that they can be, assured that the government is enabling. There are laws shaping around it, something we're going to talk about next month, and so that they can go forward. We hear more and more of that. So how is Astroscale looking at the fact that there really aren't there isn't a lot of good regulatory ecosystem? Well, there isn't a good regulatory regime in place that we can define yet. Is that something that I think Chiara said might move a little faster, or should move a little faster, so that we can enable this market to unfold? I think you're on mute, Jack.
That's too bad. That was my best point.
I know. I read your lips. It was terrific.
Incredibly compelling. No, I think nobody likes regulation for regulation's sake, right? And I say that as someone who, when I was in the US government, I spent 3 years working at the Federal Communications Commission.
That's why I asked.
There's a role for regulation. It's critical as an underpinning of a lot of industries. At the same time, the policy framework is bigger than regulation. There are tremendous success stories in other industries of industry best practices and industry-led standards development that have filled that void, gotten a lot of buy-in, and been economically responsive at the same time. I think the trick that we're in right now is for international bodies to create the sense of urgency that these things be developed, to do the ones that are necessary at the government and the intergovernmental level without over-regulating too quickly. For all the reasons we've been talking about, the industry itself is still finding its legs in terms of where we're going to be most economically successful and where we most need that. So it's a bit of a dance between the requirements of governments to create that framework and industry responding. I think there's a lot of good sign that broadly stated, the aerospace industry is looking to do that, is looking to have shared standards. But the question of speed is obviously important, right? The worst case scenario is a disastrous space debris incident leads to panicky regulation.
Yeah, exactly.
Lots of really good work by a lot of government and private sector people could be thrown out the window in a minute in the face of that. So there really is an urgency to move forward with this, even as we build the consensus around what's needed.
Yeah, that's a great point, Jack, because that's usually how it happens, right? Nothing. But what you're saying is nothing so concentrates the mind as the prospect of the noose. I mean, this stuff could happen. And government, as you know from your experience, is designed to be a deliberative. It is designed to look at all of the elements for, as I refer to the common weal, that's my Catholic upbringing, but the common good, right? And so, again, I'm just saying, how does Astroscale look at what needs to be sort of that first level of government enablement for the market that Astroscale wants to pursue to go forward?
I think that there's a lot of good work already underway, right? The FCC here in the US has taken some important steps over the last 6 months or so to reset the end of life requirements. That was a significant activity on the basis of a lot of public and private involvement. That one of the great things about regulatory processes is that they do actually consciously generate that public record, right? So that's very good. I think we're seeing a different but similar impetus inside the EU for a prioritization of space debris in a number of programs that the European Union is looking at. Certainly, Japan on the investment side, JAXA is sponsoring a series of orbital debris characterization and deorbiting activities to show the art of the possible in real life. So all of these things go together. And I think while people tend to focus on the need for regulation, and I believe there is a baseline regulation required, what the public sector can do is a combination of regulating, convening, and then sponsoring the kind of early investments and demonstrations that give confidence to the activities that show that the kinds of things Chiara is doing, the kinds of things that Alex is looking at, that these are real and can be supported.
Very good. Another area of, we've only got a couple minutes left, but another area of space safety is the one Alex hinted at, which is the peaceful use of outer space. I mean, that's going to be a government function too, right? Nation states are going to somehow need to figure out a way to cooperate and play much better than they seem to do down here. Final questions are going to be to Alex and Chiara on that one. Alex, I know world peace is not probably within your portfolio, but it's probably at the center of your human concerns. How do we begin talking about that? Because you have some influence, Chiara's has some influence, the Portuguese Space Agency. How does our industry begin to push this idea forward that, despite it being a cliche, it's really true? Peace is really good for business.
Peace is great for business, and I think it is right in the middle of not only where our hearts are, but mission is the most important thing of sustaining businesses, right? If it's not about writing a statement and putting it on a wall, it's not about next quarter's earnings, it's about why you do what you do and why that connects with everyone who does it. Because startup companies and space ventures in particular, you need to sprint a marathon, which is probably a bad example from somebody my size and as out of shape as I am. But you have to be prepared for a long haul. And we know things in space that we don't do anything about, the royal we, the space we, right? So we may know what someone's capabilities are to inflict harm and also to do some good. We may know what their opportunities are to do those things, and we may have no idea what their intent is. And right now, the global space economy doesn't have a standardized framework for how to communicate signals of intent on things as basic as maneuvers. We don't put our turn signals on between nation states when we make maneuvers. We don't have defined rules of the road the way that we do on the ocean. Which is bizarre considering that space laws is kind of loosely underpinned, or maybe more than loosely underpinned, on maritime law.
Right.
So you look at those things and you say, how do we build an environment where it is more beneficial to everyone behaving in it to behave responsibly and sustainably and with good intent, so that we can move it forward, so that we don't shut down access to a new domain because of either mishaps, which is really just poor operations or misinterpretation of the right thing to do, or because of hostile actions, which none of us want. And I don't believe, even with the posturing going on in space between certain nation state actors, I don't really believe they want to fight war in space. They may have built capability to get to quote unquote parity with each other, which I think is kind of a fool's errand. But we don't really want that. What we really want to do is unlock this new domain so that we can further humanity. And yeah, you have to be more focused, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, on greed than fear. But we have to, as the space community, set and implement these standards because no one else really will. And what I mean by that is that, you know, the people on the Zoom, many people here have influence over setting standards that can become either de facto standards because we all agree to do it and it's the best practice that we do it, or they can become fully regulated standards. But if you look at, you know, for those people on this Zoom that have had to deal with the US government on placing assets in space or assets that are regulated in space, an average consumer or user of space capability will never, hopefully, have to deal with all of the regulatory issues that we have to deal with when we place assets in space and when we operate assets in space. So I think the shorter answer to a really good question is that we have to have at top of mind how we keep access to outer space open to everyone, and so that we don't make punitive or onerous regulations that prevent developing and emerging markets and economies from accessing space as the new frontier that it is. It's not the final frontier, but it is the new frontier, and it is coming very, very fast. And we have to enable that to happen safely, sustainably, and at a growth rate that, you know, there are a lot of great launch companies, but that SpaceX is enabling. So, I mean, you know, rather than kind of make this a shameless company pitch, I think we really have to think about these things and keep our hearts and our minds aligned with that being the target area. And it should be centered to all of our businesses, because if we mess it up, we mess it up not just for us as an economy. That's actually a picture of my soon-to-be 4-year-old daughter in her NASA flight suit for Halloween last year. And every night she tells me that she wants to go to the moon and that she will fly the rocket, and I will be lucky enough to go with her. And I believe that, and I want that to happen really, really badly. And, you know, if we're going to make that future possible, and I believe in my heart it is possible, because she's a better driver than I am now, we will get there, but we've got to not mess this up for everybody else. And we have to begin to undo things like space debris and things like risks that are known and unknown risks as fast as we can. And there's just fantastic companies that are working on this. So I'm an optimist, but also a realist. It's hard.
Well, and I also noticed the other picture is of the Dalai Lama looking over your shoulder. So you're going to remember that mission. Chiara, just we're a little bit over and we want to get to Joe, excuse me, and the New York Minute. But, you know, as the mother of space safety, we can make you the mother of the peaceful use of space today with your final comments.
Yeah. So I look, I mean, just 2 statements maybe on things that have been said. I fundamentally believe that sustainability has to be environmentally and economically viable, right? So, and I think that already kind of says everything that Alex said, right? So it needs to work out in a way in which we're working together, and it also ties back to what we were saying before, right? So we're companies not working as competitors, where I think we're leading by giving positive examples of what could be done. I believe that regulation certainly can support us moving forward. I believe that industry going out there and doing the things that we're doing by showing that there's certain topics that need to be tackled, and tackling them despite all of the difficulties that we just spoke about is the way to go, because it counterbalances those negative actions which are taken, which I think need to be condemned. And I'm always very vocal about condemning those as well. But leading by positive example, I think, is just the way to go. So we need to be strong. We need to continue on this path, no matter how hard it is to find the business model, no matter how hard or it will be for the market really to establish itself, and for us to be, you know, again, economically viable, and VCs deciding whether or not they want to invest. You know, leadership and industry can certainly play a very strong role. So it's, for me, it's just a question of let's get it done no matter what.
Right, and be the change you want to see when it comes to peace.
Yes.
Stick around. There's a lot of chat activity, a lot of questions for you guys, but I'm dying to hear from my colleague, Joe Fargnoli, who's been listening patiently to this. Joe, I'm going to turn it over to you quickly. A lot to chew over here. What do you think?
Well, first of all, it was a great conversation. What a great topic, and I really thank all of our guests today, our panelists. I appreciate really what Chiara came out saying, as the mother of space safety, about the criticality of tackling this this challenge, about getting it done, or the rest is not going to happen. She made some comments about how there being very little regulation in place. However, it's not a matter of when we're going to get this right, not a matter of if we're going to get this right, but when. So expressing confidence that we think we can get our arms around this. We do appreciate the importance of the topic and it's being worked. So it's always nice to get those reassuring words from the mother of space safety. I appreciated a lot what Jack said, Jack Deasy from Astroscale, about the size of the market and NSR's confirmation of its size and its growth rate. He stressed that patience is required, and considering the right kind of investment model is something we really have to think about. The VC model is not the only model out there. We might need to think about the time horizon. My favorite saying is that there are very few bad ideas, but there's lots of bad timing. Astroscale seems to have a very solid viewpoint on how they're moving out on this. They're trying to shape the market so that investors can invest. The three topics that I heard was they're working on building infrastructure for the orbit economy to handle things like space debris. They're also pragmatically tackling policy regulation and other infrastructure issues, the rules of the road to give confidence and security to the investment community. Very smart move on their part. And they're also pragmatically working the business cases for things like debris removal, life extension. I would imagine going down to detailed pricing and making it so that the space economy can actually participate with them. So kudos to Astroscale for being that forward leaning into this. Jack also kind of alluded to the fact that, we kind of hope that we don't need a seminal catastrophic event to get this industry moving, right? We don't want more space debris created. We don't want other weapons brought into space. So, I hope that the organic activity that Astroscale is leading will create the movement that we need to create a safe space management environment, and that we don't have to wait for the equivalent of a 9/11 to happen in space before we get it moving. So thank you, Jack, for the work that Astroscale is doing. I really appreciated Alex Fielding's comments as well. We like to look at these matters historically in the Space Business Roundtable. We're not here to sell anybody's company. We're not here to stump on one particular topic or another. We're here to build a long-term perspective to give a center of gravity to the activities we're doing to advance our development in space. Alex's perspective really pointed out that it's critical to invest now or we're going to be left behind, right? So he kind of pointed out some of the topical issues that are going on in space investing, right? We're in a little bit of a lull right now. Mentioned a couple of, disappointing stories in launch, great companies, great founders, but nevertheless kind of hit a rough spot. But I want to kind of point out the fact that we're at a different point, even at a macro scale, right? If we think about the beginning of the revolution in commercial space recently, it really started, in my view, under the leadership of Scott Pace with the National Space Council. Pace and Pence at that time really created the environment where we were robustly pursuing space. A number of macro political issues have come in place, and we don't seem to have that same national strategy. However, Alex's point about Starship, I think, was really absolutely spot on. I agree that Starship will be as seminally impactful to the space community as Falcon 9 was. And to Alex's point, we should not just follow the herd and go and get depressed because space is in a lull right now and not pursue it and not invest. It is a matter of timing. And his comment was really great, that what's going to happen is that they're going to go back into chase mode once this comes back. Starship gets up, puts a few payloads up there. We start seeing that we're able to do thousands of satellites now, even more cost effectively. The importance of space management, space debris management is going to go up. They're going to come back and chase deals. So we hope with this conversation, we're able to level set a little bit of historical perspective here and keep us on balance and continuing to make progress. This idea of the gas pedal and the brake, I thought Alex was really great. And I think Alex, you mentioned your background was with Apple. As you were talking, I thought about the history of Steve Jobs and Apple, how Apple was founded in '76. Steve Jobs got fired in '85. I think Apple stock was about 10 cents a share. He got hired back in '96. Stock was 20 cents a share. He died in 2014, having grown the stock 28-fold to about $14. And we're now at about 170, 850x. Over the time Steve Jobs was rehired. So let's keep that historical perspective in mind and realize the importance of this topic and the fact that just because the market's at a dip right now, the importance of space debris management is not going to go away. And I really admire these entrepreneurs for their stick-to-itiveness. I think they'll be very handsomely rewarded in the markets.
Very good, Joe. More optimism from the New York Space Alliance and Joe Fargnoli. Really appreciate that. And, you know, at some point, we're going to have to get into that conversation about the longer term view necessary here on these investments. That's an important can of worms that got opened up here. Joe, thanks again. And we'll see you next month. I'm going to turn this over to Tamara. There are a few things coming up at SSPI that you need to know about. As I said, we've got a bunch of questions. Our guests have agreed to stick around until 15 after the hour. So Tamara, I'm going to shut up and turn it back over to you to take us through the SSPI over the next couple of weeks.
Okay, well, I'm going to do this super fast because I do want to get to the audience questions. Couple things upcoming. First of all, right now we are in reducing the risk of space. This is a topical campaign where we're focusing all of our podcasts, all of our video, number of partner events, and the upcoming orbiter, and this roundtable right here on this important topic. So we hope you tune in. I will drop the link in the chat in a little bit while the audience is discussing. Part of the partner events, here's some things that are upcoming. First of all, next week, Beyond Earth is having an event on human spaceflight safety and concept and practice. In June, out in the UK, if you're in the UK, we'd love for you to join our UK SSPI chapter on their conversation about reducing the risks of space. That's at SSPI UK at Millbank in London. And later in June, big special event, Secure World Foundation is hosting the 5th Summit for Space Sustainability. This is the New York Space Business Roundtable. This event is happening for the first time in New York over by the UN, so hope you can be there. New thing getting ready to happen with our new partners, Empire Space. We are having a Space Day New York. What? Seriously, Space Day New York. This is going to be virtual this year. It's leading into a live event probably next year. You can check them out at the URL that's on the page. This is where we get to build our New York State ecosystem in space, so check them out. And for SSPI upcoming, of course, next week, Thursday, SSPI Wise is having an open meeting dealing with building your personal brand. And so we invite everybody, women and allies of women, to be present. And next month, we continue this series on commercial space infrastructure with a talk about the legal environment. And with that, no, we're not doing that. Okay, with that, I am super happy to be able to invite all of us to come on and ask questions. And we had a couple of questions. So if I can call, if Samuel is still in the room, Samuel, if you want to ask a question, you're welcome to do so. And you all have the ability to unmute now at this time.
Yeah, and if you could just identify where you come from. By the way, Tamara, thank you, because you just demonstrated that people in Brooklyn do speak faster than people in Manhattan when it comes to doing the commercials at the end.
Okay. Samuel, you are able to unmute. Would you like to come online? And if anybody else wants to raise their hands to be recognized, you're welcome to do so. All right. And let's see. Can't unmute. Can I ask the question? Okay. All right, sure. So here we go. Where is Samuel's question? All right. So Samuel says, all right, as soon as I find it, I just had it. Okay. He said, okay, rocketeers have hard enough time figuring out rockets, but apparently even harder time figuring out economics. Have we learned our lesson from the less than stellar SPAC history? I think that's a question to all of our panelists. Anybody's welcome to jump in, and I'm going to actually bring you all back on screen.
Yeah, Chiara, why don't you want to take that one on first?
Sorry, I'm trying to figure out the question. I was
You want?
Yes,
Can you repeat the question, please?
absolutely.
Cameron?
So I'm reading it from the chat. He says, Rocketeers have a hard enough time figuring out rockets, but apparently an even harder time figuring out economics. Have we learned our lessons from the less than stellar SPAC history?
Well, I was actually reading up on some comments regarding SPACs in a panel with some VC funds that happened also in Satellite 2023. I think there was a comment there that we'll probably not see as many SPACs happening in the near future, but they'll be coming back. So I don't know if that means we've learned our lesson according to Samuel, but I understand that there's going to be certainly some changes in the way we approach things in the space business. We'll have to see.
Alex, you were talking about the great wheel turning, the circles, the cycles. How do you answer that question?
Well, I mean, the truth is that some companies are really, really good private companies that just aren't ready to go public. And there's some companies that are great private companies that have all the metrics that should be public companies and have a need to raise in the public markets. Right now, I think the lesson learned is if you don't need to raise funds on the public market, be a private company. And if you do need to raise in the public market, then you don't have a choice, because the middle of the space economy is still somewhat missing, right? So early stage venture, still making bets, still, I mean, being maybe a little bit overly cautious right now as we wait for that massive payload to catch up and the economy to begin to slide towards commercial and away from just government. But, you know, you look at the downfall of many of the SPACs. What was so attractive about a SPAC? It was safe harbor. You could do a 5-year forecast. You can't do that as a public company. I mean, I'm not Miss Cleo. I don't have a crystal ball. I can't predict more than, you know, a year or two down the road what our company will do from an economic standpoint. Beyond that, it's wishful. And SPACs had advantages of both being able to make statements that you couldn't make as a public company without incredible scrutiny and shareholder lawsuits and other things if you don't make the target, that they had a free pass on. And when regulators decided, hey, maybe that's not in the public's best interest, we watched the market violently react in the other direction, which was safe harbor's gone away. And now we've got a bunch of companies that no longer want to make forecasts 5 years out because they will be held to them. And we also saw companies that didn't have the economics that were ready to be there, that were just on the cusp, but had run out of great vehicles to fundraise on privately, right? So where is the growth capital, and where are PE firms, maybe at the scale capital, that are not looking to take controlling interests or major interests in these companies? There's a mid-market investment piece that says, hey, once I need more than $100 million or so, I'm in this territory of you know, places that are potentially more or less beneficial to public markets. So I don't think it's the SPAC as a vehicle that's a bad thing or an evil thing or the wrong thing, but it's certainly, the timing is everything, and the company's metrics are everything. There are a lot of companies that went public at a huge expense to themselves. I mean, it's not free from burden, right? You become a public company, now you have to do things you don't have to do as a private company, and those things cost money and take time. And I would, you know, my own kind of guidance there is just, if you're ready to be a public company and you need to, do it. And if you can be a private company and raise successfully and grow your business and scale it with private investment, boy, that sounds like a better way to go right at this moment with the market the way it is. But, you know, that's, I don't think it's about the vehicle, but I think it is an unattractive vehicle at this moment because of how many companies over promised and under delivered.
Jack, you want anything to add to that?
I think Alex and Chiara have described a lot of the dynamics on the funding side really well. I think the other piece that I would add is something else that Rocketeer companies need to be good at is actually the product work, right? Are we building things that customers need, want, desire? Are we building them in the right order? Are we introducing them in a way that customers can access them at the scale that they need them? For Astroscale, we are privately funded, so we're in a position to be able to do some of that building, but we spend a lot of time on the solution itself and not just the really cool hardware, which is hard enough by itself, but putting that hardware into a solution that's market relevant is the key for us. But I think for lots of different startup companies that are earlier stage than Astroscale is, to find that niche in the market. And it gets back to the point that I think Chiara made earlier on, which is a lot of the different pieces of the orbital economy are getting assembled. Companies are putting those places together. We are complementary to each other, and the overall solution is what's going to bring us to the next step, includes of investment being compelling.
Yeah, very good. I hope Vulcan gets up, by the way. They've got a mission on there. It's a first space burial company called Celestis is riding with them. We're doing a podcast with their founders. They're actually burying the remains of 4 presidents, a few people from Star Trek's crew. Fascinating business model, but that's a plug for our podcast, The Better Satellite World. Tamara, what else do we have?
We've got so much and we're running out of time because we're at 1:13 and I am in fact shutting us down in 2 minutes. But I want to raise this question that Michael asked in the chat. He said, do you foresee a time when companies are fined for adding debris, regardless of what it is, in space or the oceans to further encourage sustainable technology or at least accountability for polluting? And Chiara gave a response in the chat, but I'd like to put it out there for everybody.
Jack, you want to pick that up? Do we have a recycling market, a secondary market for the debris?
Yeah, let me make 2 points. I know we're short on time. One of them is when you listen to our founder, Nobu Okada, he talks about space sustainability is sustainability general, right? The two are connected. And it's really encouraging. He's at the G7 summit this week where space debris and space sustainability are on the agenda. That's a sign of really positive development. The other point I'd make quickly is there are interesting partnerships being developed. We're working with Cislunar Industries in Colorado and Colorado State University on taking orbital debris and turning it into fuel pellets that can then be used on orbit. So you pay the gravity tax once and you are able to recycle the debris into something useful. This is one of a whole bunch of ways where, as the economy develops in space, we will actually see the benefit of being able to use things that today are trash in just as we try to use them on Earth in recycled and reusable ways.
I think that's a real positive way to exit this conversation. Thank you, Jack. That's all the time we have, unfortunately, gang. I really want to thank Chiara, Jack, and Alex for making the time for us. That was a fascinating conversation, and I see the audience stayed with us all the way. So thanks for being here and doing this for us. As always, I want to thank my colleague, Joe Fargnoli, for his New York Minute. Thank Tamara for producing this and putting it all together. And Ari Yates, our behind-the-scenes production assistant, who works really hard to make the New York Space Business Roundtable a success. I want to thank all of our sponsors. We wouldn't be here without you. And as we always say at SSPI, now it's time to go out and up and make it a better satellite world. So take care, everybody.
Take care, all. Thank you so much.